and you want to clean up that mess, but it's a little beyond your ability, then why not turn to somebody who's never created a mess? So my objection to Western solutions is that these solutions are invented based on the same mentality that has gotten us into these problems. So let me show you this 1 minute video. This is how I want to start. This 1 minute. Let's see if I can do this. Enjoyment. Root of ecological problems is enjoyment. At the root of ecological problems is misplaced enjoyment. Selfish enjoyment honors oneself and other humans at the expense of the environment. Unselfish, non-exploitative enjoyment celebrates all life. The Vaishnava culture has such enjoyment. It's based on the life force, the soul, the essence. Vaishnavas celebrate the gods of nature and God of gods, Vishnu. Such celebrations are joyful reminders that life is not meant for selfish pursuits. Vaishnava culture has the practical solution to environmental disaster: enjoyment. Hundreds of millions of people have demonstrated it over thousands of years. It's a proven solution. And Vaishnava enjoyment can be adopted by American society. A change in the way Americans enjoy life must be adopted. Otherwise, society is doomed to consume and destroy all the resources the earth has to offer. Join the Save Earth Now movement. Make a change. Enjoy life without harming the environment. So I'm very happy to see that there are some new faces here, some people that I'm not yet acquainted with. I'm going to start by, I wanted to emphasize, because some people have heard these similar topics from me before, but I wanted to emphasize that in our, I have a few of these, maybe you could pass them out to me. Pass the thing. So I've written this article on enjoyment. Actually, maybe I shouldn't have passed that right away. Go ahead. But before we get to that, which is difficult to do now, of course, everybody's looking at the page. But before we get to that, I want to go through enjoyment based on Prabhupada and our literature, our basic literature. Do we have any Bhagavad Gita or anything handy? It's okay. But Prabhupada explains that one who seeks pleasure externally is a materialist, and one who seeks pleasure internally is a spiritualist. And there's this is the Bhagavad Gita. Now, within the tradition, this Bhagavad Gita, many people have heard of the Bhagavad Gita, but within the various Indian traditions, we represent the Vaishnava culture. And specifically ours is the, let's say, Northeast Indian. Vaishnava culture, all Indian cultures tend to be regional. So we represent Northeast Indian Vaishnava culture. But, the same themes exist throughout Vaishnava culture. Vaishnava means worshippers of Vishnu. So Vishnu or Krishna, same. And there's some, there are differences, but essentially Vaishnavas accept Vishnu and Krishna. So Vaishnavas are probably 300 million, very difficult to count, somewhere between 300 and 700. So 300 is conservative. Bhagavad Gita, the culture is really based on the Gita. The Gita influence is very strong. Now the Gita itself represents an older, you could say older philosophical approach that's in the Upanishads and a book called the Vedanta Sutra. Now Vedanta Sutra, now this is very technical, I have to apologize for getting a little technical, but in the Vedanta Sutra there's a verse, Ananda Mayo Bhyasa. Sutra means like just a sort of a germ, a seed, an aphorism that communicates a much more pregnant kind of philosophical understanding. So even though it's just simple, 3 words, Ananda Mayo Bhyasa. Ananda means pleasure or enjoyment. Mayo means composed of. And Abhyasat means, it's a little oblique, but it means that it's that this concept of Anandamayo is repeated, or it's ubiquitous throughout the philosophy. That the Supreme and all of the souls are at their core is enjoyment. So Prabhupada comments on that. That the spirit is by nature full of happiness, full of enjoyment. So the opposite of that, I want to go very briefly and quickly through some fundamental philosophical concepts that, starting with this, starting here in the Bhagavad Gita. Now, in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna emphasizes that everyone is soul, and soul within this, within the Vaishnava tradition and other traditions as well, the soul is distinct from the body. In the West, that's generally not the concept. The Judeo-Christian concept of soul is that somehow the soul is a little amorphous. Some people consider the soul as part of the body, that it's just a general part of our makeup. And it's a little bit ill-defined. And people sort of define it based on how they wish to define it. But within this tradition, the Vaishnava Vedanta tradition, soul is distinct from the body. And soul is meant to be united with the Supreme. And in general, there's 2 concepts of the Supreme. There's an impersonal concept that the Supreme is Brahman. He is the Supreme Spirit that embodies all. Everyone's heard one with the universe, or one with all. And the other concept wherein the soul and the Supreme are of the same quality. They're both spiritual in quality, but there's a dual relationship, that the spirit or the soul remains forever in this dual relationship of bhakti, exchange, loving exchange. So this is our tradition. Generally, that's the Vaishnava tradition. Soul, different from the body. So when the soul, so that's the first emphasis, second chapter. Third and fourth chapters start to describe them. So what is our problem then? What's the issue? Well, the issue is that the soul identifies with this temporary covering, which is the body. So sometimes as a modern analogy, using a modern analogy, we say that the body is like a vehicle, like a car, and the soul is like the person who's within the car. We don't want to identify with that. And the car is just temporary. We can get in the car and leave the car. The car falls apart, but we can remain. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives the example of attire. We have a dress, an attire, and then we can change that. It wears out, we discard it, and we get a new one. So that's the idea of the soul. It's also, in general, the idea behind transmigration of the soul or reincarnation. So the soul is there, it goes through one body, and then it goes into another body. So without getting into all that, the problem is that the soul is the soul identifies with the temporary covering. So we know there's some kind of limited identification. So I would go in the parking lot and we say, well, where's your car? And we say, oh, I'm right over here. So there's some kind of limited identification. We can understand that we tend to be identified with basically everything in this world, and we think of things as mine, like my property. If I buy a house, I think of it as mine, but just a few million years ago, it belonged to some Tyrannosaurus or something, you know. So it's not that we really, historically speaking, you know, in terms of hundreds or millions of years, you know, this country belonged to the Indians or the Native Americans, however you want to describe them, and so, you know, historically and beyond history, there's really nothing that's ours. That it's our intense identification with this material arrangement that we're cast in. We're cast in this, and it's another conversation to discuss exactly how that developed. But the problem then is boiled down. There's a kind of a mechanics that Krishna discusses. It's the mechanics of our involvement here. And it boils down to senses and sense objects. Now this is, anybody who's studied Socrates and Stoicism, there are some similarities to ancient Greek philosophy also. But this is the ancient Indian philosophy and also Vaishnava philosophy, that senses and sense objects. Now we know about our senses, hearing, seeing, tasting, touching, feeling. So the objects are those things that attract us. So seeing, I like to see these nice paintings. I like to see people, attractive people, and then sometimes I reject those things. So my senses are attracted and repulsed. So accepting and rejecting. There's a magnetism there. So one side of the magnetic attraction is that this intense desire, and even desire to possess. So I like you, I'm looking at you, you're an attractive person, and then I say, I want to possess you, you know, you are my friend, and oh, I love you, you know, it's like, I want to bring you closer, I want to possess you, based on this attraction. And so this is the problem in the world, because I'm misidentifying. I identify with these senses, and I'm actually spirit, I'm actually soul, and through this false identity, and is described in the literature as ignorance. This is the fundamental ignorance. All other forms of ignorance come from this fundamental ignorance. So actually it's described that those who are the wisest, within the Vaishnava tradition we accept that there are even higher beings, higher, within this realm, this material realm, worldly realm, that they may live for millions of years. They're exalted beings. They also are tinged with this fundamental ignorance, that they have this identification. It may be very subtle, much more subtle than ours. So everyone is in the same boat, basically. Abrahma Puna Loka, Punaravartin, how's it go? Punaravartino Virgina. So everything is based on this fundamental ignorance. So the mechanics, back to the mechanics. The mechanics are that we have these senses and they're magnetized toward the sense objects. So the whole process of yoga, according to Krishna's, he doesn't talk about asanas, he doesn't talk about yoga from that perspective. Yoga is completely different. Even Patanjali, even those who talk about asanas, they talk about the goal of yoga is to become free from this ignorance and to become detached from the sense objects. Detached. So the functions of the mind, of the intelligence, all these other subtle bodily functions, they're in service to this magnetism, the senses, to the objects. The senses are impelled toward the objects, and then the others are in service to them. So I'm very clever if I clever meaning my mind and intelligence work together in a very clever way. I want to enjoy something. I see something, and I want to enjoy it. I want to get it, possess it. I want to connect with it. So then the mind and the intelligence work together to accomplish that. So our whole sort of being, this is material being, is absorbed in this, and the soul then becomes carried away. And the yoga is meant to withdraw the soul back and focus the attention of the soul to the Supreme, either within to the soul or to the Supreme. And however, we're very attached in our particular line to this idea that the soul has a relationship with Krishna, and our process is called bhakti. So our process is to redevelop that connection with Krishna through bhakti, which means love in service. But in general, there are other disciplines, sister disciplines, you could say, or maybe even cousins. Maybe we don't acknowledge them as so close as sisters, but at least they're cousins or relatives. However, whatever system or whatever tradition they have, the fundamental concept is soul is different from the body, and the attention must be directed toward the soul and how the soul is somehow united with the Supreme. So this is the problem. And throughout the literature, the same message is given that Prabhupada, I just took a quote from one lecture that he gives. One who seeks pleasure externally is a materialist. One who seeks pleasure internally is a spiritualist. So I just gave a very long explanation of this one sentence. Externally meaning the connection of the senses with sense objects. Internally meaning directing one's attention, one's intelligence, one's subtle faculties rather than using those subtle faculties, our intelligence, our cleverness, even our desires, very subtle, desires themselves. We're not nihilists or Buddhists, so we don't say suppress all desire. We say redirect desire and intelligence, these subtle faculties, inward toward the soul. So how's this done? Then we progress a little bit in Bhagavad Gita, 3rd, 4th chapter. That it's done through yoga. Yoga means to link. Now you could say broadly that yoga means to link with the soul. You could say that it means to link with the Supreme. However you define the Supreme, just as something amorphous, the collective of all souls, of all spirit. And then we say that the Supreme is the person. So Prabhupada calls the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So not just God or one of the gods or demigods. He's the Godhead. He's the head of the gods, and he's a personality. So that's our distinct concept. Those who follow Chaitanya, this picture, the large picture on the top. So that was his teaching. But within the Vaishnava teaching, there are broader interpretations. I'm just presenting something broad for sake of argument, in order to represent the entire Vaishnava sort of panorama of philosophical perspectives. The fundamental perspective, however, all of them say the soul is different from the body composed of senses, basically, mind, subtle aspects, or mind intelligence, are completely carried away by this temporary covering. It's temporary. It's only going to last 80, 100 years at that. And all of the world, everything in the world, it's not ours. It was there before we came, and it will be there. Everybody knows it's kind of a joke that you can't take anything with you when you die. So, and general consensus that there are processes for yoga to link with the Supreme. And there's another concept called yajna. Yajna and yoga are basically work together. They're very similar. Both yajna and yoga they're concepts that have existed for thousands of years. The ancient Vedic society, you could say that the ancient Vedic society evolved into the Vaishnava culture. So within the ancient Vedic society, there was a lot of focus on yajna. Yajna is translated as sacrifice, but it means much more than that. It means basically through yajna and karma yoga. We'll replace yajna with karma yoga. And through karma yoga, one learns to basically redirect enjoyment away from this sense connection and enjoy the Supreme. So yoga, even within, not all forms of Buddhism except yoga, but even within Tibetan Buddhism, there's this concept of yoga. So in general, yoga is considered to be a kind of external process that links the internal soul with the Supreme. So how do you just think about the soul or connect the soul with the Supreme? It's very amorphous. That concept is very, how do you grasp that? Well, yoga is the external process for doing that. We're external beings. We're here in the world. So we need a process outside of us, and that's yoga. So again, speaking in general, all the different disciplines, even going into a little bit into Buddhism, not all, some minority aspect of Buddhism. That is yoga. Yoga means to link. But it's an external process. Everybody knows this, doing exercises. And that just, doing exercises is, within the tradition, it's just a way of gaining control of one's faculties. So get control of the physical part, or your physical aspect, your then mental, breathing, pranayama, meditation, dhyana. Then these are all parts of yoga. Dhyana, then samadhi, becoming completely absorbed in trance. So different aspects of yoga. But Krishna emphasizes karma yoga here in the beginning. Karma yoga is linked with yajna also. This is kind of, yajna is a very interesting concept, but we'll call it karma yoga. That suffices. So karma yoga. So now in the external world, so how do we, what is the fundamental way? Karma yoga is especially applicable in our culture, in our society, modern society. There's other yogas, but in terms of spirituality, karma yoga is especially useful in our society. I'm going to explain one. And some people know about this woman, Tulsi Gabbard. She's running for president. So she has affiliation. She has some background in this tradition. So she describes herself as a karma yogi. So this concept of karma yoga is very, I don't want to get into all that, but karma yoga is an important concept to understand. So, what is karma yoga? Karma means work. So, please try to throw out your idea of karma. Let's put it completely aside. Forget this social idea that if I do something good to you, I give you $100, then I'm going to get $100 back. This is kind of a social distortion, modern, hip, whatever, distortion of karma. Karma simply means work. And karma, as work, tends to mean, it's a broad term, but really tends to mean 90% your occupation. So your work. You're an instructor, you're like a professor at the university, and you give classes. That's your work. You're doing that work. That's your karma. Yes, ma'am.
Then what is different if you point karma like that? So then what is the difference with dharma?
With what?
Dharma.
Dharma. Dharma means your responsibility, your duty.
But that's pretty related to.
It governs karma. There's some.
It governs karma. Okay.
There's some governs. If you're a principled person, then you act in a certain way. So dharma are the principles or the responsibilities, the basic principles, the duties. It's the rules. Dharma is more static. It's the rules. Karma is the action. Both of these. But karma is a little complex. Dharma, I would say, is even more complex. So that's a sort of a simple response to your question. So, but karma is occupation. So let's look at karma as occupation. What we do. So we're born here in this world. We have certain gifts We have certain abilities. One of us is very strong and stupid, and another one is, this is a little hyperbole. I'm just, trying to give an example. Excuse me for calling somebody stupid. So I'll say somebody's strong and simple-minded, and another person is weak but brilliant. So we have some innate capabilities, and then we learn. We set about learning. Now this really so-called intelligent guy, he gets into drugs and he ruins his mind, and the other guy, he's a little simple-minded, but in his simple-mindedness, he decides when he's 21 he's going to buy a couple of trucks, and he gets into trucking and he makes $40 million, even though he's a simple-minded guy. But so people are composed, they're sort of external, the way they compose, the way they act in the world is comprised of their birth, their nature at birth, and what you could say nature and nurture. So the way they're oriented in the world, their interests and that sort of thing. So that's considered karma. Those things influence karma. I mean to say, I don't mean that's considered karma. I mean to say that the execution of their abilities and their interests, karma, it's their occupation, it's the action that they're performing, that's karma. And that karma, that action, is what propels them through life and into the next life. They go on and on from one life to another. So, how is karma influenced? How do you then steer? How do we steer? What can we do to influence karma? Through yajna and karma yoga. So, yajna and karma yoga are meant as steering mechanisms for karma. People always think, oh, you should just give $100 to somebody and then it'll come back to you. It's such a simplistic idea, very limited and very sort of modern hip concept. Karma is much deeper than that. So karma is this vehicle. I'm just talking about Bhagavad Gita. I'm not inventing any of these things. So again, to reiterate, karma is one's occupation, or not occupation in the sense of you're a professor, but it's just your general action in life. This is how you act. And one's profession, that one's 8 hours, 10 hours a day, or even if one's profession is a lazy person, that's my profession. I'm doing something, I'm just sitting and waiting for the check from the government. That's my it's still action. I have to feed myself somehow. So life is action. So that's karma. Yajna or karma yoga, these are the vehicles through which we can steer our karma. Either in this world, karma yoga, the reason I'm saying yajna and karma yoga, yajna tends to be an attempt to steer our karma upwards within the material realm. It's not necessarily spiritual. Karma yoga is especially spiritual. As soon as we start talking about karma yoga, because yoga means to connect with the soul or the supreme. So as soon as we start to talk about karma yoga, now we're talking about steering up to our higher connection, our higher, I say connection because yoga, our higher connection with the supreme, however we conceive of the supreme. And we conceive the supreme as this person. And we want to get to bhakti. Bhakti means our wonderful, sweet interaction with the supreme. But karma yoga is this way, first step, our way to connect with the Supreme. Yajna, we can remain here. We can do some kind of yajna which may involve sacrifice or charity or austerity. And through that we can steer our karma in a higher way, to a higher birth. If we just allow karma to go and we are not concerned about improvement, then the general tendency is we can either remain on the same plane or go down. But inertia, if we're not careful, if we're irresponsible, then see, I like to use the word responsible because that's a word that in the American lexicon, the word responsible is an important word. So dharma is very, that word responsible is a part of dharma. So if we're irresponsible, if we're not dharmic, and we don't apply ourselves to steer our karma upwards, if we're apathetic and irresponsible, then we go down. That's how everyone's heard about this idea of reincarnation. So how does one become an animal or an insect? It's because we're irresponsible about using the resources of our life, and it's through action. And karma is, according to Krishna in the Gita, karma is the thing that propels us. It's the action. Now it's kind of both internal and external. It's our karma, but karma is also the force of the universe that propels us into that next life, whether it's up to the higher realm, down to a lower realm, or into the life of an animal or plant, or we can transcend karma, and through karma yoga and bhakti or some other process we can unite with the Supreme through yoga. So I meant to do this very simply and summarize, but what's the time like?
2:25.
Okay, so I'm going to have to finish up. Okay, so now this is our basic philosophy. I've just gone over the basic philosophy, and this is and all this is very individual and spiritual. Now, what I like, I'm starting a project to talk about the environment based on this concept of enjoyment. So what is enjoyment? There's two types of enjoyment here. Well, let's sort of break it down to two types. The two types being, Prabhupada says, the one who seeks pleasure externally is a materialist, and one who seeks pleasure internally is a spiritualist. So we can understand from that, he implies that there's two types of enjoyment. So how do we seek this higher type of enjoyment? It's through this karma yoga or yajna. So without getting into a lot of detail, I just want to go to the heart of this. Now, generally in the West, we like to talk about spirituality as a very individual thing. It's like whatever floats your, balloon or plane or something, floats your boat. Yeah, sort of. It's whatever appeals to you personally. But I'm presenting the Vaishnava culture, which is based on these fundamental concepts. Excuse me. I'm presenting Vaishnava culture as a society or as a culture that has components that are important in today's society, because today's society tends to be overly exploitative of nature, of the environment. So it's as a society. So you as an individual, you're not doing much to exploit the nature, or whoever it is, somebody out walking on the street, they're not doing all that much individually. It's socially. America is doing quite a lot of destruction of the environment, but even America, along with America, it's Europe and Australia and everyone, all these societies collectively. So, culturally, we can understand culturally that when the culture has this kind of understanding of enjoyment, our collective enjoyment. So what's our collective enjoyment? As soon as we get home, let's all go on Amazon and order something, so that's our enjoyment. We want to go to the mall, we want to go on Amazon, and so all this collective impact on the environment. So we go to what is it, Walmart, and no, is that right? Who's Sam Walton? Walmart, yeah. Mm-hmm. So Walmart, we take all of our plastic bags home, we put our plastic bags in the ocean, we choke the whales, we order things on Amazon, they're produced in China, and the factories in China that we cater to, they're polluting Beijing, and so we're it's based on our enjoyment. How do we enjoy life? We destroy the atmosphere, our world. I love to, in Mexico, I love to walk down a street like in a kind of rural or semi-rural area, even in cities, but you see these ants, they're kind of large ants, not that large, and they create this little sand pile, usually, just little sand pile, and they have their hole that they go into. And then, like 3 feet radius around, it's barren. They create this sort of barren, sort of everything. They've taken you can see outside of that radius, maybe a little grass is there and something's coming up. But they've created their whole, they've destroyed everything. And then they have to go out and collect out away from. So I used to think, well, we're like that too. There's New York, it's all pavement and big buildings. And okay, we made a few parks, we decided, no, we can't do it too much. We've got to have our little parks here and there. But this is in my mind, that was my personal analogy to the human society, that it's almost a natural thing that we, like the ants, we tend to be very destructive. But these old cultures, the Vaishnava culture, and Vaishnava culture is not unique in this, but of course this is our discipline, so I like to say Vaishnava culture, but these old culture, they were conscious of the fact that humans are exploitative. I mean, if you look in India, if you go to India, you see these Jains. The Jains, they wear masks on their face. The Jain, like monks, not everyone, but Jain monks, they have masks because they don't even want to breathe in insects, and they have the whisks and they put them in front of as they walk. So, and not just the Jains, Buddhists, the Hindus, a lot of these pre-industrial cultures that were thriving, they had this concept that Americans are like these, if they're left unchecked, they're going to destroy everything. So we're following the Vaishnava culture. And it has this aspect. And the unique aspect of Vaishnava culture in my mind, and I'm representing Prabhupada and Krishna, is enjoyment. Now that is something important. Because what's causing all this destruction? What's at the core of the destruction? Now we could say greed, we could say overconsumption. Those are kind of negative, but what fosters this greed, these desires, this overconsumption, is the way we enjoy life. So Prabhupada says, Prabhupada is here, that again, the same quote, taking pleasure externally as opposed to pleasure internally. It's a little more difficult. It has to be cultivated. It's a culture. So we can do it though. We can find this culture, and Vaishnava culture is one of them. If you want to become a Jain, that's fine. But become a Jain. There's negatives and positives in every culture. But this is the Vaishnava culture. Become a Vaishnava and understand, and it's not just as I said, not just a spiritual thing for an individual. It's a cultural thing for a collective, and how collectively we can. I need one of these back. Do you have one? And how collectively we can enjoy life. So I'm going to read this quickly. I think it's time to wrap up, right? So this is something that I wrote, and just for my presentation here, I put in italics where I'm getting these things from. I mean, I consider that I try to write in modern language, or as much as possible, using modern language and modern concepts. But basically, I'm basing this on the Vaishnava tradition. So in italics, I put quotes from different sources. So let me read it through quickly. Many are aware that superficially addressing environmental issues will not solve the immense problems that are going to afflict posterity. So I'm trying to wake people up here. Look, it's not just going to affect you. It's going to be our children, children's children, and so forth. Unless cultural values change. So this is a hint. Now I'm going to talk about the values within Vaishnava culture. So it's not just, okay, let's try to solve the problem of recycling, let's try to figure out how to do solar power, let's try to get the United Nations to restrict emissions or something like that. We need fundamental values here. It's just going to continue. So unless the values change, the problems will continue. And now the next paragraph, the solution is to adopt enjoyment. Individual and social, and I'm emphasizing social, that does not destroy the earth. Modern culture considers the pursuit of happiness, so I'm taking something from the Declaration of Independence, to be an unalienable right. Society tends to understand that such happiness shouldn't encroach on other humans, sort of. But enormous mistreatment of the environment is rampant, not just out of necessity, but out of so-called happiness. So we think that I have the right, as long as I don't hurt you or you or you, because you're right here. I mean, it's okay if I hurt, some damn foreigner, but as long as I don't hurt the people in my vicinity, I'm okay. And I can just do anything to the environment, to the animals, to the mountains, to the trees, the minerals. So then, where am I taking this? Here in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 16:9, Krishna says that people with no concept of the soul and little discernment, in this case, little discernment means they don't know how to discern according to yoga, according to this concept of soul, that they're carried away with the sense magnetism to the sense objects. That's the subtle meaning of discernment here. They engage in unbeneficial, horrible works that wreak havoc in the world. And then Prabhupada, we take his comments is all important. We're his followers, so we take these. And he says the materialists, and this is a summary, I've summarized this. So not exact words, but it's a paraphrase. So they have no concept of God, thinking that they're advancing. Oh, this is so modern civilization. But they're unintelligent and devoid of all sense. They try to enjoy this world almost to the limits, or to the utmost limit. And they invent things for their enjoyment. They consider that such inventions to the advancement of civilization. So this is a fact. I mean, I've researched this. I was reading this article by this guy from Caltech. I'm from California. So California Institute of Technology. I was born in that city where the California Institute of Technology. And so this guy in the 50s, he says directly, I mean, here's this so-called brilliant man from Caltech, one of the top MIT, Caltech, maybe number 2, 3 technical universities in the country. And he says that technology, advancement of technology is an indicator of advanced civilization. So this is such a predominant idea. Science and technology, that's the indication of advanced civilization. Well, it's the indication, then what? Where does this destruction of the environment come about? How does that come about? We're so advanced that... So this is what Prabhupada said. But the result is that people grow more and more violent and more cruel to animals and other human beings. And he left out the environment because it wasn't such an issue when he was writing his commentary. So I write, in pre-industrial and ancient societies, environment caused far less harm. One could argue that they didn't have the facility to do so, but the fact remains that regardless of circumstances, in general they were satisfied. Everyone is satisfied, regardless of your circumstance. You can think that people are poor. There have been studies that say, yes, if you're richer, you can be happier. So, and that's the general idea. A lot of people think that if you're wealthier, you're a little happier. Of course, wealthy people are also miserable. But that doesn't mean that just because you're wealthier, because wealthier people are exploiting. We're in the United States, we are exploiting. We're taking more than our share of the resources of the world. That's what we've done. And those of us who are Europeans, our ancestors, we came from, those of us who are European descent, our ancestors came here and took the land away from so-called primitive people. We're more advanced because we have advanced technology. But no, those people, regardless of being primitive, they at least had the sense to live according to their means and be satisfied. So are we going to say that because they're primitive, they were not satisfied? They weren't happy. Those indigenous people were not happy. And now we've taken everything away from them, and are they happy? Oh, they're worse. They're miserable. So this is relative, this idea of happiness in the world. So we would do well to imitate these forms of enjoyment in pre-industrial society. So in a lecture, Prabhupada explained, human prosperity flourishes by natural gifts and not by gigantic industrial enterprises. Industrial enterprises are products of a godless civilization, and they cause the destruction of the noble aims of human life. So I want to jump forward and say that let's go down to the last paragraph in italics. This is summarized from a lecture, probably. The masses have got money, and they simply spend it for sense enjoyment. According to Vedic civilization, the masses shouldn't be given so much money. Simply what they require, because they don't know how to utilize money. So there's this dynamic. I was speaking with this friend of mine. He's an ex-ambassador. He's from Pakistan. He was a Pakistani ambassador to Yemen. He's retired. He's an old man. I can say he's old because he's 80. He's like 8 years older than me. No, 80, that's 6 years old. Anyway. So he's really old. So we were talking about the environment. He said, yeah, he said that in the last 100, 150 years, we've been so concerned about the masses, our sort of socialist doctrines that reacted so much to the abuses that arose from wherever. There are a lot of abuses within the industrial society, but then of course pre-industrial society, abuses also existed. So big reaction. So everyone has to live like a king or queen. Everyone has to have the best medical care. They have to have the best everything. I'm not saying that people shouldn't have this, and we're not saying that we should destroy industry as well. We're not saying that. But to expect that everyone can live the whole world. So my Pakistani friend was saying that, yeah, we elevated the status of the masses at the expense of the environment. So it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. And the solution that yoga presents, the solution that Bhagavad Gita presents, the solution that Prabhupada is presenting, at the core is enjoyment. We have to redirect our enjoyment and figure out how to, because enjoyment is really there within the soul. It's at the core of our existence, and it's in the core of society. So how are we going to redirect, not by bombing industries or destroying slaughterhouses or doing some kind of radical thing like that, but how are we going to redirect the enjoyment, our own enjoyment and the enjoyment of society, away from materialistic consumption and this external enjoyment to internal enjoyment. So then I say on the second page, third paragraph, the Vaishnava culture, which has thrived for thousands of years in India, Southeast Asia, and now around the world, is more than 300 million strong, and the tradition has an excellent record with the environment. Now, some people can say, well, there's a lot of pollution in India, but I'm talking about, let's see, if you go back, I had the privilege of visiting India in the 1970s. If you go back even just before 1992, when India entered the global economy, since then there's been a lot of pollution. But in the 70s, much more natural way of life. Then you go back 100 years, that's India. And of course, we're representing the Vaishnava culture here. So let's go down to the last, Bhagavad Gita 3:16, the last paragraph, the italics, the second to last italics. Krishna says, Arjuna, one who doesn't participate in the cycle of yajna presented here. Now, I'm not going to get into what yajna involves, but I'm saying it's kind of a sister to karma yoga. One who doesn't participate in the cycle of yajna presented here lives an irresponsible, decadent life of sense enjoyment, sense of indulgence, a life in vain. So then Prabhupada explains here that Krishna condemns the mammonist philosophy of work hard and enjoy. So thus, the above mentioned cycle of performing yajna is absolutely necessary for those who wish to enjoy. So because we can't enjoy, the whole world cannot enjoy at the expense of the environment. They say that if everybody wants to enjoy according to the standard of America and Australia and some other countries that are really good at exploiting the earth. We need 4 Earths, at least. There's not enough resources. So we just end up destructive. So Prabhupada says, it's necessary for those who wish to enjoy this idea of yajna. So a worldly or materialistic person need not strictly follow the spiritual aspects of yajna or karma yoga, but those who wish to enjoy require purification by the cycle of yajna. So I think I just need to say 1 or 2 sentences about what's meant by yajna. What's meant by yajna, the fundamental concept of yajna, is that, okay, I explained what karma is. Now, from karma is, those who are from India, you know karma phala. Karma phala means the fruit of this work. So when we do something, there's a result, a money that comes, or harvest, or something that comes from our work. So yajna means how we use that result. If we use that result for enjoyment, for going on Amazon and exploiting the world, I'm not saying you shouldn't go on Amazon, but the idea is that if we use it for external happiness, that's not yajna. That furthers our karma, either level or down, depending. Yajna is if we use our resources for something higher. It carries us higher. So Prabhupada says, he even says, okay, if you don't wish to be involved in spiritual life, he says, a materialistic person need not strictly follow spiritual aspects of yajna or karma yoga. So he says that yajna is necessary to control, to restrict the destructive aspect of humans. There's no concept like this in the Western world, at least. And many in the Eastern world have sort of put this aside. They're so influenced by this Western unrestricted enjoyment. So without getting too much, this has gone on a little bit too long already, without getting too much into this concept of yajna, let me just conclude by saying that yajna is this, it acts as a steering mechanism to steer human society upward. And even upward within this world, within the material realm, away from destructive behavior. And of course, as followers of this Vaishnava tradition, we also want to go up to the spiritual realm. We want to go beyond. And then yajna and karma yoga act to take us higher to bhakti and to renew our relationship with Krishna and Vishnu. So that's all I have to say. That was quite enough. Thank you.